Here's an important thing. We're going to talk about a really important thing that retirees often neglect. It's something they forget to do, and it often leads to some major problems. What is it? Dan, I want to know. Well, it has to do with what happens to your stuff when you die. Yes, we're talking about things happening when you die. And I know, Tony, what you're going to say. Welcome to the show. You're going to say, Dan, I'm not going to be around. So what's the difference? I'm not going to be around to deal with it. So
I
let the
wouldn't say
chips
that.
fall.
I wouldn't say that because I care about my family, Dan.
All right. Well, I want to hear a story from you because I'm going to give you some time to make one up if you can't think of one. But I'm going to give a quick story about my mom.
Okay.
My mom passed away 5 years ago. And right before she passed away, I went to go visit her in the hospital with my family. And I have three brothers. And one of my other brothers was visiting at the same time. So the kids and my brother went, his kids, my kids, and him went out. We were in New York City. They went out to explore. And it was me, my mom, and my sister-in-law. And we were sitting there talking to my mom, and she was lucid. She was, she was sick, but not overly sick, and she was on drugs to deal with pain. So she was in and out of sleep. She was taking naps, and she woke up, and it was just like, woke up, like kind of like throw mama from the train when he's trying to kill her with the trumpet in her ear. I don't know if you remember that really weird reference, Danny DeVito blowing the
Yes.
trumpet, and
Yes.
she wakes up, and so my mom wakes up, and then she says, okay, Violet's going to get this necklace. Kaylee's going to get this piece of jewelry. And she just starts spitballing things that she wants with certain possessions she has.
Was anyone
And I'm sitting
recording
there.
it or writing it down?
No. So my sister-in-law is looking at me. We weren't
Whoops.
expecting this.
Right.
I'm looking at my mom. We're like, what is going on here? So my sister-in-law grabs a pad of paper that she had and starts writing stuff down.
Sure.
And I'm thinking, because this is the way I think, first immediately, is this valid? Like, is this like, let's say my mom passed away minutes later, like, would this count? Would this have any merit? Would this be a legally binding statement? I'm thinking along these lines. So I'm like, hey ma, slow down, you're not going anywhere, let's think this through. And then she kept at it. No, this is, I got this, I've been thinking about it. So then I'm like, oh, this is terrible. Who wants to think about this stuff? I don't want to think about her dying right now, but even though we all know that's what's happening. And then I started to think, well, my mom, there's 11 grandkids. I got three brothers. There's 11 grandkids, and she's naming some, but not others. And I'm like, this is not going to go well. Luckily, not luckily, but my kids and my family was not named in any of the stuff that she's giving out. So it's not like to Dan, I leave everything. And, so there wasn't like, but I was immediately thinking about the family harmony of, well, that's not what she told me yesterday. And I thought, what is this nonsense? And to my mom, she was just doing what she thought was right.
Right.
I want to do this. But what it highlights and what I want to talk about today is, this is something that should have been thought of and done prior to being in this situation. Now, my dad is still alive. So my mom's stuff moved to my dad. So we didn't have to have this dramatic, who gets what. My dad had to figure it out. But this type of information from my mom was useful for my dad to help him make the decisions.
Sure.
But if my mom had certain decisions she wanted to have made, that should have been done by her while she was in good health and spirits and mental acuity. So this was a big issue that for some families, now for ours, it wasn't a major issue, but I see it. I see it with other families. I've been in the middle of this as the financial advisor, retirement planner. Well, Dan, what did she tell you, or what did he say to you? I don't get involved, but this was my family and I saw it firsthand. I'm only imagining you, listener, are thinking, right? How about you, Tony? When your grandfather died, was there any drama along these lines?
There was. And what you're talking about, and I think the point of this whole thing is, do you want family harmony after you're gone, or do you want to break the family apart? And that's the difference. And if you don't communicate your desires before you pass, it can tear a family apart. And my dad's family, super close knit. He has 3 siblings, so there's 4 kids. And his mother passed away long before. But his dad lived to 101, as I've talked about on the show before, Grandpa Bob. But
Bob.
when my grandpa passed, my grandpa was their English and a little stoic, and just communication wasn't great. And my grandpa thought, I'm going to make sure all my ducks are in a row. He had a will, and he worked with an attorney. His attorney died many years before, or retired many years before he passed. So then he got some new person, which wasn't as good, didn't really pay attention, but he updated the will here and there. So it was really disjointed. And he never sat all 4 kids down and talked to them like that. And it wasn't clearly in writing. So the communication was poor. And I saw that poor communication tear him apart. Like my father and his youngest brother, who were close, grew up on that farm. They farmed together with my grandpa, not speaking. They're not
I'm
speaking.
currently not speaking.
And it's terrible.
And it's because some oversight,
Yes.
or was it more that grandpa said this or dad said this and I don't agree with it, he should have done it this way? Or is it because there was ambiguity?
Ambiguity, and because, like Jim said, oh, dad wanted me to have his truck. And my dad said no. He indicated he wanted me to have it, so I think we should sell it and split it 3 ways. But Jim came after my grandpa died and took his pickup and just took it to his house. And so that caught my dad blew up, right? And my dad is really low key, but this really upset him. And so it was that he didn't clarify certain things, like the farmland divided out. It's pretty clear in the will that they have to do that. And it was transfer on death, TOD, or whatever they call it. So it immediately, this 77
Didn't
acres
go through probate. Right.
the
Right.
land went right to my dad. Right.
Right.
So it's just on death, my dad owned that land. On death, Jim owned his 80 acres, and Alma, his sister, owned her 80. And then Jerry's kids, Jerry passed away. That was the oldest sibling. His kids inherited the other 80. So that was very clear, the land and the houses. And so my grandfather then said the tractors are to be sold, and Jim and my dad get the money from that. Now, why he excluded Jerry and Alma from that, who knows? He never communicated that with anyone. So
right, he sprung that on him, but it was at least he wrote it down, so it wasn't like.
yes. Right.
And
But what he didn't
yeah.
write down was he didn't make clear the household items and the tools in the shop and the pickup truck. That was not clearly spelled out anywhere.
Right.
And the
Exactly.
antiques in the house. So my dad's mad because my dad got the house, but Alma and Jim came and just took everything they wanted out of the house. And my dad's like, well, you can't take that. You got to leave that, or I need, so it was very frustrating.
And it could be something small. It could be
like the pickup truck, relatively next to the land and the farm. My grandpa didn't even think, who cares about the truck, right?
Who cares about an old pickup truck? Who cares about that stupid doily?
Yeah.
Right? Who cares about that lamp? I do. Yeah. That's important to me, and it's important to my brother.
He's got
and now we're going to fight about it.
China hutch, but he didn't really specify. So, and Elmo's made the argument I should get all the proceeds from the household goods and have first dibs because I don't get any of the tractors. So, and my dad said the shop's part of the farm. I inherited the farm. I should get the stuff in the shop. So they're all
Yeah.
none of this. And people don't realize that, well, as long as the house and my accounts I've got those taken care of, I'm not worried. But
Exactly. And we've done shows on ownership and how that works. And I'm
Yeah.
going to go real quick review this because this is really important and people neglect it. But look at I gave you my story, which could have been trouble because I thought, well, what if the granddaughter wanted this necklace and not that one? And then, you know, my dad was still around to make things happen. And then we give your example, and it's usually joint, husband and wife. One of them passes, the other one, it's fine. It all goes to the surviving spouse.
Right.
But it's when the second spouse dies, that's when the stuff hits the fan. And that's what happened with you. So we can avoid this, though. This can be avoided. And this is what I'm
It
saying.
could have
This is what
easily
people
been
need to do.
avoided. Yeah.
Right. Communication, obviously, but then there's legal, right? So you can own something in one of three ways. It could be a contract. An example would be the farm. Okay. The farm was owned. If your dad didn't have listed each of the four siblings get 80 acres, then it would have been a free for all. Then it would have been, well, and hopefully he spelled out which acres too, because it
Yes,
could
he
be
did.
like,
Oh,
right.
It was on a map. They had maps with the will.
Right.
Yeah.
Contract. That's a contract. This is where it goes. Yeah. This is ownership, and legally says transfer on death or payable on death, or here's your beneficiary for your IRA. You could say in your will, I want my IRA to go to the animal shelter. But if you have your friend Bobby as the beneficiary, Bobby's going to get it because whatever you name as the beneficiary is going to go because it's a contract, right? Easy. Then you have joint with rights of survivorship. So this would be, okay, you and your spouse own the house. Joint with rights of survivorship. If one of you die, the other one has the right to keep it as their own. No problems asked. What happens when the second person dies? This is what normally happens. Where's the house go? So you can name any sort of property joint with rights of survivorship. And then the survivor doesn't have to be your spouse. It could be your son that you want to have the house. So no problems with these. It's the probate stuff that comes with some issues. And so let's go through your example. What is a probate asset? Before I get into it, probate we don't want. We don't want probate. We did show on Aretha Franklin going through probate. She had 2 wills,
Prince.
right? Go watch that if you want. Actually, another
Prince.
great show to watch. I did it with Steve Nino. You know Steve. He was sitting right there where you are. And he did a show. I'll put it up here. And we went through probate, explained it all in terms. But bottom line is you don't want probate because it takes so long. It's expensive because you got to bring a lawyer in. And it's public. Everyone gets to see it. And you know what's probate? A will. A will doesn't bypass probate. Oh, you get this, this, and this. Someone still has to prove that that's accurate. So it goes to the courts. So you don't want stuff in probate. All right. Stuff that's in probate that would go through probate would be stuff in one person's name. The truck. The truck. It's in your dad's name. Who gets it? It goes through probate.
It was in my grandpa's name. Yeah.
I could make a claim against it. No, he said he was going to give it to me. I remember meeting Uncle Bob. We were camping together in the Rocky Mountain National Park. And he said, the truck's mine. And he wrote it on a sheet of paper. See, like that's what would happen unless you name somebody, personal property, the farm tools. Prime example. This is just perfect example. I'm sorry that you had to deal with this. Your family has to deal with this, but this is a prime example. Yeah. What happens to the tools in the farm? What happens to the equipment in the house? What happens to the furniture? What happens to the jewelry? In my mom's case, unless you specifically have an instrument where you name them,
Like it's
So
written out in the as part of the will. There's a document where you've written out who gets what of that stuff.
still going to go through probate if it's in the will. However, if you create a trust and then the trust document you have specific items,
Sure.
that bypasses probate. So these personal property stuff is usually a difficult problem because people don't want to itemize stuff, but you can have, hey, anything that's in the house goes 20, 25% to the fore. You could do that. That helps, but you want to get as much out of probate as possible. And then some people, tenants in
But
common.
one way to do that, the solution you're saying is a trust?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. One way to do it is joint with rights of survivorship. Tenants in common is not that. If people think, oh, I got joint tenants in common. Okay, example, Tony. I own business with you. You and I sell records throughout the country, and we have an inventory of $50,000 worth of LPs, right? And we split everything 50-50. Travel expenses, profits, everything. We shop, we have a great time, we love it. I die. But I'm smart, Tony. We have tenants in common. We have this business. We're 50-50 and it's tenants in common. Okay, I die. What happens? It's not joint with rights of survivorship. Joint rights of survivorship, you own 100%. Tenants in common, without rights of survivorship, who owns my half? My wife, most likely. It's going to go through probate. Who's my estate? So now all of a sudden, Tony, your dream, luxury, fun side gig of selling records is not with me, it's with my wife. You better like it because she's not into records. So what happens? You scramble. Now what? You have to buy her out? I don't know. She's going to show up and start selling them for pennies when you're like, "No, this is worth $50." Right? This is a problem people have, is property that is not named beneficiary, not in a contract, not in a trust. Big problem. Okay, so how do you fix it? Name the beneficiaries. Name them. Come up with it. How many times have you heard stories of people who forget to take the ex-spouse off of the life insurance policy?
Not good. Because beneficiary designations take precedent even over a will if it's an account or something that can have a beneficiary.
Right. Terrible mistake.
And there are ways to put beneficiaries on houses, right? On a house contract.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did a show on ladybird deeds.
Yeah.
Watch that.
Yeah.
In Florida. It's not called ladybird deed in all states. Most states, it would be an enhanced life estate. But watch that show on what to do with the house and how to name someone as beneficiary. But think of it this, like you might have an old 401k or an IRA or 403b that you've forgotten about. And then, you're gonna deal with it when you get older. And then your spouse passes away, and then you get remarried, and you're like, oh, I don't have to touch that till I'm 73, right? For required minimum distributions. So I'm not going to think about it. But did you change the beneficiary? What if you don't have any beneficiary? Does it go to the new spouse or does it go to the kids? Wow, right? So just name beneficiaries. That avoids probate. Or you create a trust. You create a trust. Do you need a trust? Maybe not. We did a show on creating trusts with the lawyer. So watch that if you want. But I'll end with a big alert about creating the trust. My dad and mom had a trust. They have a trust. My dad's still alive. When my mom died, everything stayed with my dad. So there was no issues. But when my dad dies, anything that he owns is in the trust. Or is it? This is the big caveat. Don't create a trust and then forget to fund it. Put your assets in the trust. So in my example, my dad, when he moved to Florida, he sold his house in New York, which was in the trust. The money went to his bank account. He bought a new house in Florida. Doesn't have a mortgage. Who owns that house? He bought it in his own name. My dad dies. Who gets the house? Goes to probate because There's no named beneficiary. He doesn't have a ladybird deed. He didn't put it in the trust, so the trust doesn't own it. So when he dies, it goes to probate.
So how would he put that in the trust? How would he?
Easy. You change the deed. You say, I'm giving this, and you give it to the trust. And now we did this.
So the
We
house
did
is in
it.
the trust's name.
Yes, we did it after the fact. And we did. My wife went with them to the closing, and I forgot to say, make sure you're buying the house as the trust. And it didn't dawn on me until a few years later that he bought it in his own name. I saw a piece of mail on the mortgage statement or the tax assessment, and I was like, oh my gosh. So we just changed the deed, moved it from his name to the trust. Now the trust is the owner. Something happens to my dad, nothing happens to the house because the trust didn't die. The trust is still alive. The trust owns the house. No change of ownership. Now, what is the trust going to do? Well, that's what my mom and dad did. They wrote down what happens to the assets in the trust. No probate, no public knowledge about it. No one gets to see what's in the trust and what to do. No lawyer needed to administer the trust. It's all private. It's all done. So easily avoided.
Wow.
Okay. So you nailed it, Tony. Family harmony, easily destroyed. And it could be the simplest of assets. It could be that old 1800s ironing board. I wanted that. Well, so did I. I'm not going to talk to my brother now because I got the truck and he didn't. So
there's more reasons than that, Dan, to not talk to your brother. Just an FYI.
I got 3 of them, so if one bothers me, there's always 2 others that I could do it.
You know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to name names, Ed, but Ed Wendell.
So you, like Tony, you're not going to be around to witness the disharmony between your 3 kids if you don't take steps now to figure this stuff out.
Right.
As another example, you might leave stuff to little Johnny who's less than 18 years old. That's a problem.
I got bad news for little Johnny. If he's less than 18, he's not getting jack squat.
Right. What if your grandfather left a piece of land to your youngest daughter? And it's like she's not 21 or whatever the age of majority is in Minnesota. It's like, well, can she inherit it? Who gets it? Where does that go? Headache. So think about these things. And you can always change it. But the bottom line is no one wants to think about this. But by doing so now, you can prevent a lot of drama.
Yep.
Or you could create drama too. You could
intentionally you can stir things up. You can purposely. Yeah. Depends how much you love your family, I guess.
Right. Yeah. But if you want to rule from the grave, you're gonna have to set it up in advance. I don't want little Johnny to get any money until he passes a drug test. I don't want Susie to get money until she's 50. Can you do that? Not in a will. Not on a piece of paper. In a trust, you can.
Yeah.
Because the trust isn't dead. It's there and it's going to be run by somebody. Just another word of caution. If you're going to do something like that, say little Johnny needs to pass a drug test, just know that the executor of your trust is going to be the one figuring that out. So if you got a brother that's like, hey, Johnny, I got the purse strings, trouble. So word of advice. But again, the idea here.
Again, no one's naming names, Ed Wendell.
We don't want to cause disharmony. We're trying to avoid it. And this is the one thing that many of the people that I deal with just don't get to.
Right. Well, Dan, I think the highlight of the show today for me was you attempting to make a throw mama from the train reference. That that kind of came out of left field. That or your shirt reminds me of a Tame Impala album cover. But those are things that our listeners, it's too inside maybe. But Dan, great show today. Obviously, this is hugely an important, serious topic. I just had to throw something lighthearted in there. But yeah.
Tony, I'm sorry you're going through the troubles that your family's going through, but I'm
Yeah.
really glad you're willing to share with us so that others may avoid it. That's
Sure.
all.
Well, I've had to play, I've played intermediary because between my dad and his brother, and it is stressful, but I mean, it's starting to mellow out. So I think we're on the downside now, which is good.
Good. All right. Well, one thing that will probably happen as a result of this, your father and his siblings will probably get their ducks in a row so that doesn't happen to their kids. That's
Yeah.
usually
Well,
what
my mom
happens.
and dad did. That's for sure. So
Right. Right.
they learned lessons. Yep.
There you go. All right. Thanks for a good show, Tony. We'll catch everyone next week.
Thank-
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.